Hello, everyone. Welcome to Davenant Discussions. My name is Ben Miller. I'm here with Dr. Brad Littlejohn, the president of Davenant Trust. And in this group of videos, we are trying to explore how some of Davenant's core ideas work themselves out in modern day, particularly North American, politics and citizenship. And a question that I think many of us run into again and again could be framed something like this. How are we as thinking Christians to position ourselves between, on one hand, simply being quote-unquote brainwashed by the establishment? You think of C.S. Lewis's The Hideous Strength. You think of George Orwell's warnings. Don't just believe it because it's something that the mainstream says. But on the other hand, in the United States, we certainly have a lot of what we could call fringe groups, minorities whose positions may be more or less well thought out, that are very much anti-establishment, but sometimes have their own dogmas that they hold to as rigidly, let's say, as anything the establishment might feed to us. And your work in history is on Richard Hooker, often read as an establishment man, in the Elizabethan settlement or whatever. And I'm just interested in your thoughts on how Christians, whether in politics or elsewhere, can kind of thread that needle.
I think when we look around at the many different sort of fringe movements we see in American politics and religion, some of which are good, some of which I would sign on to, some of which I wouldn't. I mean, I think let's give a range of examples here. You have movements like anti-vaccine movement. You have six-day creation. You have global warming skepticism. You have your gold standard guys in economics.
These movements are not mainstream.
And yeah, they're all defined by being very not mainstream and consciously so. And I think that's the danger is often the initial motivation is, particularly it's more theological realm, but is biblical fidelity. Okay, we want to be faithful to the Bible and not just to the zeitgeist. Also, can be a healthy skepticism in some of these more maybe economic issues or whatever. Healthy skepticism toward the experts and the fact that expert opinion tends to be sort of self-confirming. It tends to be in these kind of clubs of respectable opinion where people peddle these opinions because everybody else does. Or skepticism about the economic incentives, maybe. Maybe the anti-vaccine group is concerned about drug companies biasing the science for economic motives. And I think these are all very legitimate concerns. But what often happens is once the movement becomes kind of self-consciously minority, self-consciously anti-establishment, then other factors start to kick in, where it's an awareness of, and they tend to travel together. Like I hold a minority opinion, I know I'm holding a minority opinion in this one area, and then that tends to start extending itself elsewhere. Like I think the minority is right here. Oh, and I just realized that I'm in a small minority here. And because the minority is usually right in my experience, then that just proves that I'm in the right group here, because we should always expect to be a minority because we live in a wicked age.
So I'm holding to something now more because it's minority than because I really have thought it through and am persuaded that it's true.
Exactly. And particularly I think for Christians this gets to be a danger because we know that there are things that are, the gospel is foolishness to the Greeks. We know that there are things where we should expect to be persecuted for our beliefs.
We're comfortable in that role almost.
And right, but the Bible, because the Bible says the gospel is foolishness, it doesn't say foolishness is the gospel, right? So it doesn't go the other way in the sense that anything that people think is, that the surrounding culture thinks is dumb, or anything in which you find yourself in a small minority, or anything that you're being persecuted for is obviously a mark of faithfulness. But we often make that equation, and we just assume we're being persecuted for righteousness' sake, when maybe you're being persecuted for being a jackass's sake.
Right. Right. Not that it could ever happen. So we have on one hand this sort of dogmatic minority adherence, which ends up being a mirror image of just sort of the gullible establishment follower. They're kind of two versions of a similar problem. How then do we not end up in one of those places? How do we become thinking Christians in a more healthy way?
Well, I think one thing to do is just to always be sort of on guard against, have you fallen into the kind of position that it becomes self-confirming in the sense that any evidence that you're confronted with manages to help bolster your case. So it's evidence that appears to support your minority position. Okay, good, add it to your arsenal. It's evidence that goes against it. Well, then you say, this just shows, this is the kind of lie that you would expect the establishment to tell. Or, look, this just shows how far they have gone in fabricating the evidence. Or yes, of course, we just expect to be persecuted, right? So that no matter what the evidence is, you manage to use it to confirm your hypothesis because you have just become so convinced of it. And I think when the fringe movement can very easily do that, can very easily start twisting any evidence as confirming evidence. And that's a dangerous place to be epistemologically.
And the same thing from the establishment side. Well, that's what you
Exactly.
expect from fringe people.
Exactly.
Don't even explore it.
Yeah.
If you are growing up in a community that has one or the other of these tendencies, how do you explore that and stretch your thinking in healthy ways without becoming just a burr under the saddle?
Yeah. Well, one thing here is that we are called to respect, to privilege in a certain way the community in which we are called. To say, God put these mentors in my life, these teachers in my life, these church people in my life for a reason. And nobody approaches the truth from nowhere. And we can't try to just sort of jump to a standpoint of absolute objectivity. And so we rightly can go in and say, I don't have a full perspective on this. I don't know all the ins and outs, but I know that my mentors, my teachers approach this way. And I know, and maybe that means a minority view. I know that there's a large establishment view to the contrary, but I'm going to respect that judgment of the community that I'm in to the extent of at least not immediately kind of jumping ship for whatever the most fashionable view is. But we are called to, we need to cultivate communities that are not just privileging conformity above all else, but are teaching people, mentoring people in such a way that the disciple can challenge the mentor. And I think we have a problem with this as conservative Christian communities, where we have a defensiveness. We recognize we're a minority, and we really have a defensiveness about that, and we don't want to let people, leave the reservation. And so people start asking any kind of questions, and they get shunned. So I would say, on the one hand, we need to respect those communities of discourse, respect our fathers, our pastors, etc. But we also need to learn from them the discipline of thinking and asking questions about how does this actually conform to reality. And often and I think the important thing to get here is that sometimes the establishment view is the establishment view because the majority of people come to that view because that's where the evidence points. Right. And the majority sometimes follows after evil, but sometimes the majority just follows after the evidence. Right. And we need to be alive to the possibility that you're in the minority just because you're wrong.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. So we need the Bible, we need community, we need tradition, and we need reason.
Exactly.
Very helpful. Thank you.
Thanks.